Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
Time for True Show is sponsored by the Office of Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, a periodontal, dental implant and laser specialist in New York City, for over 40 years. Dr. Fialkoff was honored by the International College of Dentists and Pierre Fauchard, and received the Presidential Lifetime Humanitarian Honor from the White House. Call us at 718-229-3838.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard, you don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart, yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
Welcome to A Time for Truth show. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, and it's a pleasure to have you back with us tonight. A lot of you have been wondering how you can avail yourselves of the shows. It's very simple. Go on YouTube, find A Time for Truth show, A Time for Truth show, and click on the subscribe button, and you will become our member. There is no cost, and we'll be glad to have you and avail you of all the previous episodes, which I'm sure you're going to find very informative. So tonight we're going to continue with part 2 of a series that we started, and this is with Mr. Bruce Wiseman. Bruce Wiseman. Mr. Wiseman is a human rights activist and also a successful entrepreneur and economic advisor. Very interesting combination. And engineer, if you can, let's put his pictures up on the screen. He is author of the #1 best-selling book on economics, exposing the real forces behind the global financial crisis. And there you see him on the screen. His book is called The Coming Financial Crisis, A Look Behind the Wizard's Curtain. You know, like behind the curtain of the Wizard of Oz. What is the real situation? It was a #1 Amazon bestseller, exposing the actual source of the crisis. Mr. Wiseman is also editor and publisher of Strategic Financial Intelligence, a monthly financial newsletter dealing with investing and the economy. He's been a senior credit officer for 2 major California banks and is co-founder of the prestigious Los Angeles-based business management company, which he's now retired from, but that he founded with his partner, Wiseman and Ampert Consulting. He consults the biggest names in Hollywood, and now has gone on to further work on a much larger scale than even that. He devotes his time to writing and speaking and educating, as well as his widely heralded market research and survey company, On Target Research. He's the former chairman of the Department of History at JFK University. And as I said, he's a very unique, talented, and multifaceted individual. And we're very lucky to have him again with us tonight. And Engineer Buddha, if you will, let's bring up live Mr. Bruce Wiseman on A Time for Truth show. Welcome.
Hi, Dr. Ben. Thanks for the kind introduction. A quick note, let me just at the beginning, Um, Thanks for the note on my book, The Coming Financial Crisis. I've got about a dozen books up on Amazon on the economy, and I also write a series, which I enjoy a lot. But I do my writing under a pen name, John Truman Wolfe. So if somebody's looking for the book, or a book, if you like fiction, you have to check John Truman Wolfe. When I started writing, I didn't think Bruce Wiseman was a very authorly name, and I changed it to something I felt was a little. So you see at the top of the book there, John Truman Wolfe. All my writing is with that name. Yeah.
Well, very catchy name. I think it's a very smart move, and you know, with that book right on the screen, and Booty, if you leave it up for a moment, I want you to tell us about this book and bring us up to speed, because I don't know, like most viewers, I don't know if I really know much about what's coming, and I need to know. So please go ahead.
Well, good. Let me just a couple of sentences review our last show where we talked about digital currencies coming, so-called CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. We are in the midst of a major global restructuring of currency on this planet. And the digital currencies, cash is going to be gone, and digital currencies are going to take their place. And that's something that's coming, suggested at the end of the last show. One of the things you can do, I mean, there's a few that I write about, but one of the things you can do is acquire some precious metals a little at a time as this is coming fast. Now, the other major thing that I wanted to talk about, Dr. Ben, is so-called lands. The top bank on planet Earth is called the Bank for International Settlements. This is the central banker's central bank. So its members are the Federal Reserve, the Bank of Canada, the Bank of Japan. The central bank of the planet are members there. And the Bank for International Settlements basically dictates banking throughout the planet, because they give orders to the central banks. And as I think most people know, it is the central banks that control money in a particular country, interest rates and other tools. Now, one of the things that the Bank for International Settlements did a few years ago is they mandated a policy called bail-in. What this means is that if a bank is troubled, in other words, they're not doing well, and we'll talk about that in a second, banks not doing well, then the bank has the right to take depositors' money and convert it to bank stock without the depositor's permission. That's bail-in policy. Having a problem, they take depositors' money. This isn't a joke. This is real. And it has happened. They implemented bail-in policy in Europe a couple of years ago, and in Canada a couple of years ago. Some banks have been bailed in. So this is something that is problematic. One of the solutions to bail-in policy before you go on to the solution, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but very important question I have. Because probably like a lot of the viewers, they may be saying, but I thought that couldn't happen because we have this Federal Deposit Insurance, the FDIC, and if the bank went bankrupt, that I would get my money from the FDIC. So explain to me and the viewers, how does this bail-in? Does this supersede the FDIC, or is it
part of it, or is it only in different countries? How does this bail-in procedure work? And also, the other question, when they convert your money to stock, do you get the stock, or they just take your money?
No, you get the stock, but who wants stock failing bank when they take juniors college funding? But you do get the stock. Whether or not the bank is going to survive is another question, because the bank is troubled. One thing that people don't know, Dr. Ben, is that when you deposit money in a bank, it's no longer yours. It belongs to the bank. You are a creditor, like you laid the carpet in the lobby. So they owe you the money, but it's no longer yours. It belongs to the bank. So, and it does supersede the FDIC bail-in policy. Does that answer your question?
Well, I think, let me see if I understood you correctly. So what you're saying, let's say that there was a run on the banks and the FDIC ran out of money, the banks would have the authority to, instead of just saying, well, we'll wait for the FDIC, they could then just enact bail-in and say, okay, we're going to give you stock for your money. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's got nothing to do with the FDIC. By that, I mean the bank could be trouble. The FDIC may or may not have intervened. Bank can implement bail-in policy and take let's just say as an example, as they did in Cyprus, take all the funds in excess of 100,000 and convert them to bank stock. So this has been done. This has definitely been done. So yeah, you basically have it correct. One solution, I started to touch base on this. One solution is this. Bail-in policy effective in large banks that have assets over 50 billion. So one of the things I recommend to my readers of Strategic Financial Intelligence is, if you're with one of the big center banks, B of A, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, move your funds to local, regional, and then you won't be subject to bail-in policy. If you want to know if your bank is safe, the smaller regional banks, it's a little out of date now. In a book called The 100 Safest Banks in America, it's up on Amazon for a couple of bucks. And you can see what might be available. And not to promote this as a service, but if you want me to examine your bank, the financial statement of your bank, you can send me an email, Dr. Bennett. You can share that email if you want. I have for a fee to take some time, pour through a bank's financial. But the main thing is, if you're with a big money center bank, move. So that's bail-in to implement Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. Interestingly, the Bank for International Settlements is in Switzerland, but it is immune to Swiss law. Its employees are not subject to Swiss law. They have their own law enforcement on the property. They're an entity in and of themselves. They're like the Vatican, not to throw dispersions on the Vatican, but they're like their own world, and they control this planet. So that's bail-in policy, and I wanted your listeners to be aware of that because it's very important. We're going through some very challenging times in banking. Folks that follow such things know that a couple of days ago, the FDIC put out notice that 10 banks were now troubled, and another 11 were they're two different categories of trouble. And without getting into those, about banks in the United States, some big banks that were in trouble. And most people probably know that there were 3 banks shut down a few months ago. Here's what happened there and what is happening. Banks often buy government debt. When the government does financial planning, they do it backwards, Doctor. They do it like this. What do we spend? Oh, we're going to spend $6 trillion this year. What's the income? Well, the income's $1.5 trillion or $4.5 trillion. So we're short $1 trillion plus. What do? They go to the Fed and they borrow it. This goes on year after year after year. Deficits are running $1 trillion a year. We've got a national debt in excess of $32 trillion. And that's because you work in the field of drug addiction. These congressmen are jumping. They can't not overspend. They do it every year. And when they overspend, they borrow. And the Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States, and sends money, quote, money, to the government's bank account, except the Fed doesn't have any money. They make this up out of thin air. Thin air. It's hard to get your head around. But the Federal Reserve doesn't have money. They just click a mouse and pretend it's money, and the government spends it and creates inflation.
And let me ask you something here, Mr. Wiseman. And what you're saying is that this Federal Reserve Bank is actually under the auspices of the bank in Switzerland, right?
Well, yes, they do report to them. The Fed, every couple of months, the central banks fly into Basel, Switzerland, where the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, is located, and they have meetings. It's really interesting. They do this by consensus. There isn't any global rule that mandates the Fed comply with the BIS. They just do. And every central bank in the world does by agreement. There's no actual rules here. It's just agreement. So the Fed does comply with the Bank for International Settlements, and there is a structure of how banks work in the States. There's actually an article, people can find it online. It's an article between the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England, and they wrote a joint paper on how bail-in person is. They're interested in, they want to read that, they can, put, I don't know, bail-in policy, Bank of England, Reserve Bank. They'll find it. It'll pop up.
Okay, so let me at this point ask you a question, or actually just make a comment to make sure our viewers understood. So what you're saying, if an American out there watching this show wants to protect their money under the FDIC and keep it out of this bail-in, that they would seek a local bank within their state or a local bank within the country, right? Not an international bank, is that right?
Yeah, I would recommend regional banks. There's lots of regional banks. There are the big money center banks that I mentioned. But there are good local regional banks that are usually much better run than the big ones. So yeah,
that would be one of the things that our viewers could take home, is to make sure that they're banking where their money is at least still going to have this FDIC and not be subjected to this bail-in. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct. It's a little hassle to change banks. I admit that. You know, a little bit of paperwork, but just it's more and more happening. And I think these smart deposits from, if they're in one of the big money center banks, if they're in Chase or Wells or B of A, U.S. Bank, Goldman Sachs, just, you know, look around for a local, you know, bank, maybe serves your community or your state, maybe even your, but not one of the big ones. The rule, the last rule I saw was banks in excess of 50 billion could implement bail-in, but not below 50 billion. So you just have to look at what the assets are of your bank. You can do that by going to your bank's website and just get the annual report and just look for assets. Just go down the list and look for assets. And if it's in excess of 50 billion, the bank is subject to bail-in. And bear in mind, I'm going to repeat something I said minutes ago. When you deposit money in the bank, it is no longer yours. It's no longer yours. It belongs to the bank. You are a creditor. Like you delivered some service to the bank and you want to send a bill in, you're a creditor. That money belongs to the bank. So
I'm going to ask you something. Is this some type of federal law? Because I don't think this is in the Constitution, right?
No, it's not in the it's definitely not in the Constitution.
So this is what, some kind of federal bill, or how was this established?
Yeah, it's a law. It's a banking regulation. I don't even know if it's a law. It's a banking regulation. And if your viewers, question that, or they're not sure, they can go online and ask, is the money I deposit in my bank mine? And trust me, it's not.
Interesting. And now, the bail-in that's occurred, is that basically occurred in foreign countries up to now?
Yes, that's right. There hasn't been a bail in the U.S. yet. There was one. Well, it's the test case for bail-in was in Cyprus a few years ago, where a lot of ex-KG goons had their offshore money, and
And how has it, I'm sorry. Let me ask you a question. It's so interesting, and I'm sure a lot of people out there. You're a genius at what you do. So I've got to slow you down because for you it's very, very common, and you deal with this all the time. But I'm sure my viewers want to capture this. So let me ask you a question: has bail-in occurred in China?
Not to my knowledge. It has occurred in Europe. I have not been apprised of any bail-in policy in China. China is suffering economically right now. Their unemployment rate is out the roof. But China and, just to diverge for a second, China and Russia are scarfing up gold just in huge amounts. They're gathering gold. China is trying to attack the yuan with gold. Years ago, I don't think we talked about this prior show, but some years ago I wrote a book called Crisis by Design about the BIS and other things. And a friend of mine in Taiwan sent the book to some people in Beijing. He sent me an email that said, the Chinese government would like to talk to you about solutions in the book. I thought it was a joke. I sent an email back, okay, have them fly me over business class and put me up in this fancy hotel that I knew there. And she sent me an email back. She said, they'll fly you however you want. They'll put you up wherever you want. So I flew to Beijing. This is before Xi Jinping, and relations were a little bit better than they are now. And I spent a week in Beijing talking to some reasonably high profile people. And among other things, here's the story. I had dinner with the head of China Gold. This is the largest gold mining company on planet Earth. This guy's got 40,000 employees. And he explained how they want to back the yuan with gold. Well, if that happens, the dollar is dead. And we debated this because I don't think there's enough gold for them to do that. But he was, that's what he wanted to accomplish. And that company, China Gold, is owned 6% by the CCP, the Chinese Communist. So they're gathering gold. Russia's gathering gold.
Because I think your point is well taken. So I want to just, as we get near the end of the show, bring out something to the viewers. Because much of the drugs in this country is coming from abroad. And I would think if I was a competitor to the United States of America and wanted to do the economy in the United States and do these things that you're talking about, I would flood the United States with drugs. I would make sure that I spent my money on getting drugs legalized. And I think it would be a great way of me making sure that the United States economy would not succeed and that my economy would. So I wanted to interject because I know we're going to have you back again because we're near the end of the show, and you brought out even more things that I don't know about the viewers, but I know you're getting me very desirous of protecting our great country because I don't want to see our country go down, from drugs. But now I can see how the drugs are related to the economy and how the legalization, in reality, even though it seems like you're doing something to help people, is actually going to make them more of a slave because now the economy is going to go down. I want to give you 20 seconds to answer because we're at the end of the show. I'm sorry for such little time. Really quickly. Would my survival be somewhere near the spot?
Well, as you know better than I do, there's 100,000 deaths from fentanyl in the last year. And this is coming from China, Dr. Ben. And this is an operation to take down the United people from that drug left and right, and it's the savage of the American population and the American economy. You're absolutely right.
Okay, so you know what? We've run to the end of the show. If it was up to me, I would destroy programming and we'd continue. But I know our viewers are going to lynch me if I don't say that Bruce Wiseman is going to be back again for another episode. So do I have your agreement to continue this talk?
Sure. My pleasure.
Okay, well, I want to tell you, you're a wealth of information, and I think something that I want our fellow Americans to take away from this, regardless of whether you're Democratic, Republican, Independent, if you live in the United States of America, please let's wake up to what Mr. Wiseman now is putting out, because you can actually, if you just use a little bit of what we call in Yiddish, seichel, which means a little bit of common sense, we can see that we need to start voicing our opinions as free people. Mr. Wiseman, you are amazing. Thank you again for being on the show.
My pleasure, Dr. Ben. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm sorry I had to cut you off. We're going to have to figure out how to get a longer show. But for tonight, let's do what Mr. Wiseman suggested. Check out your bank. See if you need a regional bank. Become more educated so you avoid this bail-in procedure, and speak to your local politicians, speak to your government, and tell them we don't want bail-in in America. We want our money protected. We're a free country. We don't have to follow what the world does. We can follow what America wants to do. And I don't think any party would object to that. So thank you for tuning in. We'll see you on the next episode of A Time for Truth show.
This show was sponsored by A Time for Truth Foundation Incorporated as a community service.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where go, everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your feet